Fantastic. Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the webinar on designing value propositions for emerging markets in South Africa. This webinar is brought to you by Delta Innovate, an innovation partner for future-thinking companies that want to solve big problems using new value propositions. My name is Nsako Mgiba, and I'll be your host this afternoon. And I'm super excited about the discussion that we're having here today for two reasons. The first is because having built a technology business that seeks to democratize access to safety in township communities, and also having occupied key product positions in local fintech companies such as Yoko, where we sought to empower small businesses based in townships, it's undoubtedly that this is a market that I'm extremely passionate about. The second reason why I'm super excited about this conversation is because I came across a recent Boston Consulting Group report that indicated that 2023 has delivered an increased amount of innovation, with 83% of African executives rating innovation as a top priority in 2023. So this is a timely opportunity for us to have this discussion. And what makes it even more exciting is that we've got such a diverse panel for you this evening. We've got experts, including academics, corporate innovation specialists, as well as entrepreneurs. And we all share a common passion for deeply understanding and unpacking value propositions and actually creating solutions that serve people who inhabit these communities. You're going to receive incredible insights tonight from the likes of Milani Prinsloo, Director of Infusion Knowledge Hub and the Center for Democratizing Information. You're also going to hear from Marnay de Klerk, who is Head of Innovation at the Delta. You're going to hear from Loyiso Vacha, Founder and CEO of Mappa Logistics, Robin Moore, Founder and CEO of Click, and finally, Pratika Chung, an angel investor and a seasoned financial investing strategist within the corporate sphere. So we really have got a lot to get into this evening, and I can't wait. So just to break down how the evening is going to be run, we're going to jump into the Q&A session, which will run for 50 minutes, and I'll be posing questions to our panelists, and each of them will answer about 2 or 3 questions, and we'll have no longer than 5 minutes to answer their questions. And if they so happen to finish their answer shorter than that, then I'll open up the panel for other panelists to share their perspective. And once we're done with the initial part of the Q&A, we're then going to open it up to questions from the audience that were received during the registration process through the type form. Right. Then when we're done with that, I will then come back and wrap us up and explain to you what you can expect to hear next from us. Okay, so let's jump right in. Robin, you're undoubtedly passionate about design thinking. And on a daily basis, you engage with corporate clients and take them on a journey through human-centered design. I would love for you to elaborate for us today. How do you understand this concept of human-centered design? And how does it actually inform how you create new value propositions at Click?
Cool. All right. Well, it's sort of hot off the tongue because this afternoon we've been taking one of the corporates through design thinking for emerging markets. And in fact, they're wanting to do sort of propositions for sort of patients across Africa in the healthcare environment. So it's fortuitous that we're here and we're chatting about it, because it all comes down to any value proposition, any sort of solution that you're wanting to put into the market starts with the humans first, right? And, you know, when it comes to humans, it's not just about, hey, you're a human and I'm a human and yeah, we look different, but, you know, we can engage in conversation. Well, that's not really getting down to why we do human-centered design. And human-centered design is really pinned on empathy and deeply understanding the way in people think and behave around or in certain markets and in certain industries. And when we come to understanding the humans, we don't just look at demographic information. We can all see that, you know, you're middle-aged, you might have kids, you might live in suburbia, or you're in an underserved community and, you know, you struggle about your daily life. But I make decisions in a way that some other people don't make decisions. And what often happens is that we get these inherent biases that sort of coax us along these journeys of thinking that we understand people, but really actually we're informing our opinion of these people. And what we've learned over the last couple of years, and particularly around design thinking, is that unless you're immersing yourself in the world of humans that you're really wanting to care for and solve for, can you really only claim to make a really good product or service for people? And it's centered around care, right? And Sako, actually, we were having a conversation earlier around, if you don't deeply care about the problem that you're solving, if you don't deeply care about people, then you're essentially going through a bit of a frivolous exercise. So the way in which we sort of apply design thinking with our corporates or with startups is very much centered around how we understand those humans. And we use an ecosystem of anthropologists, behavioral economists, psychologists, and then a bunch of design thinkers that just want to get immersed into understanding people and constructs. If we're working in a corporate world, we also have to deeply understand where this corporate is playing, like how they're currently interacting with their client base or their member base, and understand where and how they're wanting to grow. In conversation earlier, it's not just around creating areas or innovating within your value chain. How are you thinking beyond your value chain? How are you thinking about the people's lives which you touch on an everyday basis, but aren't necessarily thinking about solving critical problems that are inherent in your value chain? So we go along this sort of discovery journey, and we love to use the concept of a double diamond. So if you can picture sort of like two diamonds like sitting next to each other, the first one is all about understanding and empathizing with those end users. And the second is around, okay, so what is going to keep us true to the problem that we're trying to solve for? And once we've understood it a little bit better, we can then just define how are we going to be playing in this area, and what are those big opportunities that we're looking for? What are those big audacious problems? Is sometimes in IDEO, they might call them wicked problems, which I'm not such a fan of, but they are problems that we're needing to solve in societies and communities. And then, of course, we get to open it up into this world of co-creating. And the people that research the market insights and understand the humans and understand the corporate strategy are not necessarily the people that are going to be ideating with you or trying to solve for these problems. And this is often when we get people that are immersed in the data and immersed in these stories that people have told along the way in trying to articulate, well, this is a really cool concept. Why don't we try this? Or I think this proposition could work in this kind of subculture. Why don't we try that? And the idea of constantly ideating and coming up with an idea, and sometimes we call it prototyping. Prototyping does not necessarily mean that it has to be a physical prototype, a wireframe or an app, right? But it can also be a conversation. It can also be a story that you get to tell and get people to buy in. And it's what we attribute in that value. So we go along this journey, but it all comes back to how are we designing to solve a problem in the communities or people that we engage with. And then, of course, it's testing it with them, going back onto the ground, immersing yourself in the world of these people and seeing if they actually really enjoy it or really like it, or places that you can try and test and solve for differently. So yeah, at Click, we do human-centered design via design thinking in the double diamond, and work with people and collaborators. So we don't do it on our own. We dive into our ecosystem of partners like the Delta, and work together in seeing who the best people are to bring in at different points of the journey.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for those insights. Monet, I'd love to chat to you now. You've got all this experience, 13 years of experience in the UX industry. And, you say it yourself, you've delivered countless value propositions, both locally and globally. And now you hold this position at the Delta as the head of innovation. So I'm quite interested to hear from you. What are some of the tools that are publicly available that you use, right, at the Delta to actually effectively and smoothly run user research? And also, why do you often start this process with a simple design sprint?
So two good questions, Nsako. Hi, everyone. It's nice to be here. Yeah, let me break that question up into two and start with the public tools available. So the tools that you use for user research, you need to tailor it for your specific circumstances, your target market, and your team, just the way that you interact. If you use Slack and Google Workspace, you don't have to jump to something else for team communication. You can just add on top of that, see what works, what doesn't work, and kind of tailor your toolbox in that sense. We use different tools for different types of research. If we do surveys, we'll use Typeform. It breaks it up really nicely into like one question at a time. We'll use Hotjar, FigJam, Figma for prototypes and clickable designs and brochures and things like that. There's also really nice dedicated tools like Maze if you wanted to do unmoderated testing. And then that's just to name a few. So there's a whole range of tools and products out there that you can use to assist you. There's also, obviously, in the space of AI, a lot of things emerging at the moment. So make use of it. It helps you to just speed up the process. You don't have to have a physical note taker to take notes while you do user interviews or go out on a field study. You can have that done for you by a robot now. So make use of it, and also synthesizing and a whole range of things. And then on your second part of the question, why start, value proposition design with a design sprint? So a design sprint is a tool that we use to sometimes start this process off with. In terms of value proposition design, it actually ties in with Robin, what you've been saying about that empathy and that user-centered part of design really well. And why I love starting this journey with a design sprint is a deep focus on the problem and the user. So if you're not familiar with the design sprint, how it works is you start off by really diving deeply into that problem. You'll probably start with user research before you have your design sprint session. And during the first few days where you have workshops where you use design thinking activities, you really ground the entire team, the entire audience in that space, in that problem, before even jumping to solutions or thinking what you can do and why you want to solve or what you want to solve. It's really about understanding the problem deeply, and just being completely centered in that is always a good starting point, because when you design value propositions, you want to solve needs. You want to come up with solutions for pain points and needs and requirements from your customers or your users. So that's a really good starting point. And then you move over to a point of solutions and coming up with ideas. And a design sprint is a really nice way of rapidly coming up with and testing ideas. So you don't invest too much time and too much money into something that's quick. You can validate quickly and then move on from there. So that speed is also something that really stands out for me.
Sure. Thanks for sharing those insights, and I guess reminding us about the importance of starting with the problem before actually entering into the solution space and really familiarizing yourself with the problem space. Milani, now we're going to direct the question towards you. And when I had a look at your profile, there's just so much experience here in terms of researching and reshaping the understanding of unevenly developed markets and extreme inequity. You're now at the forefront of this incredible human-centric research and analytics company, and you've done so much research over the years. I'd love to hear from you, and can you please tell us more about your research techniques that you've used over the years, and explain to us how these techniques have impacted the reliability of the data that you've been collecting.
Nsako, thank you so much for that opportunity, and the perfect question for my journey is, so about around 2000 we started looking at what is now often referred to as thin file clients. And then what happens if we do not have information? Because I am so in agreement with what Robin said about the human-centered design. And often our positioning is exactly that. And I think Marnay also stressed that, to always go back to the human, to always see what it is. But what we lack in the market, and you can imagine in the 2000s and 2005s when we started that, is to say that we lack research methodologies that is appropriate for uneven markets. We often use formal techniques we think people respond the same way to surveys. And something that really came up a lot for us is how often our clients see an informal market as lesser than a formal, rather than different from a formal market, because it's in no means lesser, it just operates differently. And we do believe that that is one of the biggest capabilities that companies should build, is an ability to really perform well in the informal market, rather than going in and trying to formalize the market. As soon as we formalize, we often we add complications for people, we exclude more people, we professionalize, we make expensive, and thereby excluding more and more people. So a lot of our work has literally been, and even my own studies has been around that, to say, what if we go in sometimes and we say, we don't have a research question? And you can imagine from an academic point of view, people pass out if you said, but what is the research question? It says, but what if we really don't know? What if we go into a community and we say to people, what is the best thing that happened to you over the last 6 months? What is the worst thing that happened to you over the last 6 months? And how did you deal with that? And then you have serious insight in what risk means. And Saku, your work around alarm systems and safety, I mean, we picked up so much around that, of how people seek safety, but often are excluded because thin file clients are seen as risky, and then people do not think of very innovative solutions. And we saw quite a lot of that coming out in the last 10 years. So in the alternative research space, we started using community-based participatory research techniques that you often find in sociology. And we started to combine that with employment models. So to explain that is, clients, or in any case, our clients, are often very willing to pay a lot of money for research when it's for the middle or the upper end of the market, where their return on investment is very clear on gathering the data. But when people go deeper and deeper into the economic pyramid and facing markets with severe levels of inequality, then we find that hesitation of people asking, but what is the value of this data, and can we pay that? And when you use a traditional research methodology, I mean, it would be horrendously expensive to do representative research in the largest markets in the world. So we then started saying, but what if we use an employment project like a research project, where we bring in unemployed people that has been unemployed for longer than 2 years, because we never wanted somebody to leave their job to come and work with us, because we never knew how long we would be able to stay, and then gather research every month from their communities. And because it ran like an employment project, we had to have, of course, work for everybody every month. And that is where this concept came in, to say, but what if we truly understood context, the context in which people make their decisions? And then we started running capabilities research studies. We would study 1 month, how do people, anything related to money, anything related to technology the next month, anything related to cultures and traditions and religions the next month, anything related to what people do for entertainment and the likes of, and then month by month make sure that our field team actually have income. But we completely underestimated that value of that information over time. Oh. We are costing it now as an employment project, not a research project. And that enabled us to do 7,500 interviews per month over years and years, to say, how do we bring in that information? What can we send? And then use focus groups and community discussion groups to then add some of the detail. Because many a times, you know, as researchers, we had to face the fact that we come up with the wrong questions. we often ask questions that is interesting for us, sitting maybe in suburbia, maybe in a place that, well, with my walls and my alarm systems and all the realities of my own life, and not really understanding what the right questions would be if we are operating in very unevenly developed spaces. So that's kind of where the alternative research techniques came from, Sako.
Wow, that's incredible. So much insight in that around the importance of, I guess, contextual relevance in our design tools, but also the importance of sustained and mutually beneficial engagements with communities, so that it doesn't seem so transactional, but we have a vested interest. We're adding more value over the long term. So thank you so much for that. That was really, really insightful. And now, Loyiso, I am super excited to have you on our panel today, because I've been obviously observing the journey of MAPA over the years, and you've been building this business for a good 6 years now, and you're so well versed at cultivating value-driven partnerships within Kasi businesses in South Africa. I would love for you to just take us back for a moment to the initial phases of MAPA, and you guys validating MAPA's value proposition in the community. How did you effectively communicate your value to your early customers, and what are some of the strategies and tools you use to actually validate the concept?
Oh yeah, thanks for that, Zako. So yeah, actually when we started off, I think what helped quite a bit on my end was the fact that I was from the township, Alexandra specifically, and having understanding the intricacies of the small things or the nuances that people go through. For example, when we started off, we realized in order to get some traction or to get people utilizing the platform, we need to go back to basics. We know that individuals use what we call now the Meta suite, which is the Facebook suite, to communicate. So they'll get WhatsApp bundles, or they'll use Facebook just for communication. So we found that let's leave the whole app first situation and let's go to actually where people are. And we started off utilizing that as a platform in terms of a CRM for accepting and taking orders, which is a small nuance that people will not notice, with the assumption that download this app now, do that, but people actually have issues with just basic data. So that's where we started off in terms of, okay, how do we communicate to them? So we did WhatsApp and the Facebook suite as well. Another thing was localization is big. The assumption that majority of South Africans speak English and understand English eloquently is not really true. We would get like voice notes from people telling us in Chivenda, in Setswana, ordering as they speak vernacular, just from a general perspective. So calibrating for that was essential, just from a communication level, and then understanding before we go and build the full platform. Number two, we understood that the township or nuance, or the township in peri-urban market, rural as well in SA, is very brand conscious. So you would find that an individual, even if they're buying Aquafresh, or they would go to the store and ask for Colgate. Even if they're buying Ariel, they'll go to the store and ask for Omo. If they're buying any liquid, they'll ask for Vaseline, Sunlight, because they're very, very brand conscious. So you'll see that even Coke did very well in advertising in this regard, and also South African breweries did it very well at that as well. So understanding that the consciousness of the client, they stick. So we ensured one thing that we did very well was go on the ground, ensure that the brand MAPA resonates and is seen by the individuals on the ground. Hence why we even coined it to be called MAPA, because MAPA was coined in the township, meaning to share. So that resonates with majority of people that are in that space, and it's an easier sell to individuals because they understand intrinsically what that means. So we focused on those small nuances when we started off. And in terms of validating, I think that would be more of the easier side, because the supply chains in township regions in SA are fractured. I give you an example. When I was younger, we would go to the shopping center that's on the outskirts of the township due to spatial planning, legacy spatial planning. And what usually happens is you'd find yourself or your grandmother and yourself. She would literally have to go with like 2 kids. So we get in the taxi, so there's 3 of you. And the reason why the kids go with the parents or the grandmothers in this particular case is because they need to carry the actual plastics after the shopping has been done. So now they're incurring costs from a traveling perspective of taking 3 people and then also obviously having to carry them. So it was a more of an obvious thing to say, okay, we need to improve these legacy supply chains. And that's how we positioned ourselves in terms of solving that particular issue.
Sure, that is
in terms of how we did that practically, of building brand, we did mall activations, being at the mall, flyers, having your gazebos there, telling people what you do, and also billboards that are on main roads, because it's a seeing is believing type of economy. And I think that's where we garnered a lot of traction in terms of being understood by the market.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks so much for that, Loyiso. I mean, you shared so many great nuggets there around the importance of designing around the way people live their lives, as opposed to trying to force the behavior that you want to see. So I think it's so incredible that you guys were able to identify that so early on in your journey, and it formed the way in which you actually designed MAPA. And I think you also touched on a really incredible point around the importance of localization, and how that's actually something that you can only truly understand by staying close to the ground. So thank you so much for that. Let's move on to the next question. So really excited about this panelist as well, because of just the wealth of wisdom and experience that she possesses, kind of walking the line between being the seasoned corporate individual, but still very connected and plugged into the startup ecosystem as an angel investor. And I think because of that, Pratika, there's no one who's better suited on this call to help us understand the importance of entrepreneurs versus entrepreneurs in South Africa. Are any of these more valuable than others in our local context, or are they both equally important? Can you elaborate on those things?
Thanks, Nsako, and it's wonderful to be on a panel consisting of all these highly accomplished individuals, and to the audience for dialing in this evening as well. From an entrepreneurship perspective, it's a fairly new term that's come into the business vocabulary. The main difference, for those that are not familiar, entrepreneurs are effectively employees within a corporate or a large firm that use entrepreneurial skills to achieve a specific outcome. And typically they're involved with innovative, bespoke projects for the organization, and don't typically take on the risks that an entrepreneur would have to incur. Entrepreneurs also leverage on the organization's resources, networks, specialities across the company, whereas entrepreneurs often have a far leaner resource pool to draw upon. I read an interesting article recently that was published in the Mail and Guardian by Alexandria Proctor, the founder of Digs Connect. And she mentioned an interesting ratio being 45-45-10. And this is the global average of formal employment by large corporates, followed by self-employed and small businesses, and then finally the unemployed. And if you take South Africa's ratio, in comparison, ours is 50-10-40. So our formal employment statistics is on par, or actually exceeding the global average. But our SME, small, medium enterprise, in terms of job creation is seriously lacking, despite numerous efforts across government, public and private sector to try and bridge this gap. So, you know, having that backdrop as the context, I believe that corporate and startup entrepreneurship partnerships are one of the key ways in which we can help accelerate job creation and drive employment by corporates playing a more active role in working with entrepreneurs and leveraging what they are good at, their expertise, their innovation. But it's key to build long-lasting relationships with entrepreneurs, because often it takes time to cultivate that partnership and build two really successful businesses together. You know, from a corporate perspective and an entrepreneur, the ability to provide entrepreneurs with pilot programs, proof of concepts, you know, the panelists have spoken about, you know, validating ideas. Corporates are a perfect background and ecosystem to actually test your products in. And startups typically are far more agile, innovative. They've got access to great talent that corporates sometimes take quite a while to actually hire and get into their ecosystem. So I don't think one or the other is of more importance than the other, but I do think they need to work far more together to achieve greater success. And a last point on this is there was recently a great research report published by Founders Factory Africa, together with some startups and corporates in the ecosystem, titled Success Factors for Commercial Partnerships, Corporates and Startups Playbook. And I think the Delta post this webinar will share the link to that resource, which I think it's fabulous for founders and corporates as well, in terms of what is the secret sauce and some nice case studies on how to effectively partner. Thanks,
Wow.
Nsako.
Thanks so much for that, Pratika. I think that those are such valuable insights around, I guess, the importance of, you know, corporate and startup partnerships as a key of unlocking economic growth. But then I guess also key to that engagement is having both sides of, you know, the both parties valuing the contributions of the other as a way of actually facilitating that engagement. That's super, I guess, useful for the audience this evening. And I guess this is probably the perfect time to then now pivot a little bit in terms of the conversation and speak to, I guess, the broader ecosystem or landscape that we now all operate in, where, you know, there's so much data. We're living in a data economy, and there's such an abundance of data that it's so easy to get overwhelmed sitting with all of this data. So my next question will be targeted towards Robin. Robin, how can businesses effectively pivot and adapt quickly in today's data-saturated world without getting overwhelmed?
It's a good question, because we were, I think part of the nuances that corporates are going through now in their transitions into becoming new companies is understanding their data. The problem is that they've got so much data, they don't know where to look for it. So, you know, often when we come across organizations that have a turnaround strategy, or one where they are wanting to spin off different kinds of propositions into a market, it's you often have to start at a point of, well, what question are you wanting to answer? What is that so what that you're going to come across? What are some of those insights, those human insights that have led you to forming some of the hypotheses that you're wanting to answer in a certain subsect of the industry that you're looking to disrupt, or part of the value chain that you're wanting to innovate on? And through that, you're able to then have a look and sift and organize data in a way that will inform some of those hypotheses. But also, it's how do you build on it, or what do you take away from it? So often what happens is that organizations build these massive data lakes and massive data warehouses, and they keep adding data to it in hope that they can extract some value. But actually, they're just adding complexity to a world that exists. And how do you start to simplify your data? How do you start to simplify the questions that you want to ask and the insights that you want to build for that organization to enact action and implement? because the quicker you can go and test something in the market and retrieve insight or action on your data, the easier it's going to be to prove value in it. So how do you quickly get from that proof of concept into a proof of value? We often talk about a world of moving from design thinking into a lean startup world. And this lean startup world is around, how do you accelerate that POV or POC to POV? And then how do you start to embed it through an agile enterprise, not even an agile delivery system, right? How do you make sure that your decisions that you're making on the fly are coming back to the strategy that you want to enable in this organization and stay true to your North Star? One of the most profound books that I've managed to read, because it's a difficult read, is Daniel Kahneman's Noise. And Daniel Kahneman, being a behavioral economist, or a psychiatrist or a psychologist first, and then coming into the world of understanding human behavior, he says there is so much noise in the world in which we operate. And often, there are these gems. If you look on the outskirts of this data noise that we talk about, and then there are these obvious themes and codes that we can see come to the fore. But the obvious is obvious. People are constantly trying to iterate and innovate on what they can see in front of them. But once you start skirting out onto the periphery of this data into where the noise would almost be thrown away as outliers, really incite some gold that we want to take away. So whilst we want to organize and simplify data, you also want to see what the noise is and what's complicating the world of innovation, and have a look on the outskirts and try something bold and different and new.
Lovely, lovely. So I guess the quality of our insights is dependent on the quality of the questions we're asking our data. That's really, really fascinating.
Yeah.
And so I mean, data is not something that's only important for corporates. It's also extremely important for startups. Could you elaborate on what metrics have you been tracking at Mapa Logistics, and how have those metrics told a story about your traction to your investors, to your potential collaborators? I'm just curious to understand how you guys think about traction.
Yes, thanks for that, Zako. Data analysis is one of the big parts of Mapa, and we really look deep into it because consumer insights are everything, not only to us from a delivery and supply perspective, but also to the players in the fast-moving consumer goods space, because they require those insights to understand how to stock up the sponsor shops or the small businesses, what we call them SKUs, what type of stock they require and how much it moves. So it's one big thing that we take into consideration is our analytical dashboards, understanding the intricacies of who is buying on what specific day.
Sure.
For example, I'll give you an insight. We do understand that majority of the basic income or the household income is spent by the women population in that particular LSM. They're the ones who go and buy the bread basket in terms of being in control of the bread basket. However, we know that when it's on weekends in that particular LSM, there's a big uptake, for example, on Saturdays, where we see a lot of men ordering regarding maybe it could be an alcohol run, or it could be just getting beverages, for example. The average age of for example, another stat, the average age of the buyer that sticks the most is usually a woman between the ages of 32 and 38. Usually they've got 2 or more children, but we know that we have to target them highly because those are the ones that come back and refer us to more to other customers. So getting to the data at that analytical level is what helps us understand how to position ourselves from a marketing perspective, number one, and also an advertising perspective. Another thing that we also focus on big time is we always believe that it's retention. It's always cheaper to resell to your current customer than getting a new customer and keeping them to stick in terms of lifetime value. So we also are big on retargeting campaigns, specifically in the WhatsApp as well. But yeah, so it's that type of outlook that we use in terms of ensuring that we maintain our customers and we keep the ones that we have happy, and obviously get new customers. Another thing that we identified was just a byproduct of delivering in this ecosystem allowed us to mine specific data, like mapping data, for example. As you would know, there are roads in the township. However, you'd find that one house would have 4 bedrooms. So you could have a specific location where they say, I would like it to be sent, but from a routing perspective, that individual might not be on what you would see on Google Maps. So we also, as a concept of, as a byproduct of our delivering to the last mile for them, we also gather the mapping data from a census perspective. So yeah, that's how we look at data at MAPA, and focusing on it is one of our big things.
Sure. That's really important what you've just specified. And in an earlier discussion with Robin, actually, we discussed the importance of just, I guess, valuing data as a startup. And it's good to see that, you know, you guys have had that mentality from the very beginning to actually understand at a very granular level who your actual customers are. And then, I guess, leveraging that to then direct the messaging, to direct the positioning, to then, I guess, enable your growth and drive more traction with the right customers. So thanks for that. Super fascinating. So now I want to actually direct a question to Melanie. Melanie, we spoke earlier about the different alternative, I guess, research techniques that you've employed over your career. Now I'm actually interested to understand, what are some of the compelling insights, or maybe you could just give us one really compelling insight that has really emerged from the use of these techniques, and how has this insight, I guess, influenced the community's dynamics?
Exactly. So if I have to choose one of them, then, you know, often what we set out to find and what we end up finding can be very, very different. And I always find that refreshing, was to say, oh my word, and that possibly be the case? And then you start looking at it. So you can imagine, if you set me off on that tone, I can keep you busy all evening. But I want to give you one specific one that, it blew my mind the first time I saw that. And we've seen many iterations of that. So often we like to tell the stories, but we won't tell the stories if we can't prove it with the data as well. So a while ago, we were commissioned by one of the banks to say, okay, we do this context research. It's very much syndicated. So companies join so that they can have cost-effective insights. But then some companies will come back and says, we need a bit more of this or a bit more of that. And so what we were looking at is home loans, and how some people that they qualify for an entry-level home loan did not take the home loan. So the person was approved for the home loan, did not take the home loan, but did buy the house. And then we set out to say, okay, but why? And then the banks go on and they say, oh my word, we have to educate people in terms of the value of assets. It says, well, let's have a look. Because we use community-based research, we are able to go to somebody in the right language, using local people and the likes, and to say, look, this information came our way and we're doing a study, and would you be willing to share the story with us? And amazingly enough, lots of people are willing to share their stories. And then the person says, but so you qualified for a home loan, but you didn't take it, but you did buy the house. Congratulations, but then why didn't you take the home loan? And then the person would say something like, but a home loan is too expensive. I think, okay, that is interesting, because a home loan is supposed to be collateral-based debt, which is your cheapest debt that you can have. Says, okay, so then how did you buy the house? And that, okay, but then the person said, I still remember the first interview I was reading in that, to say, okay, but I got a personal loan from each one of the banks. Then I borrowed some money from friends and family. And then I got the rest of the money from the Mashonisas. And you're like, oh my word, this is the most expensive house on earth ever. There has never been a more expensive house than this specific house. And you're like, oh, wow. And when we would say, but wouldn't because you have to be, as we interview, we of course do not disagree with our respondents. But wouldn't the interest rate of the home loan would have been much less? And then the person says, no, you don't understand. If I cannot pay all the installments, 12 out of 12, the bank will take my money back, my house back. The bank will take the house back. And you think, oh my word. But in a world where wage-based people have fluctuating income, but a bank likes to charge the same amount, it's an investment into poverty, because it's inevitable as the person goes in and out of employment. At some point in time, the person won't be able to make up the installments for the house, and then of course the house can be taken back by the bank. But as soon as the person has spread the debt over many different sources and merely keeps the debt alive, the Credit Act kicks in, and you cannot touch the house. And then the interesting thing is, in Nsako, I want you to put on Robin's hat to say human-centric thinking. Did the person make the wrong decision or the right decision?
Sure. That is powerful.
Yeah.
That is powerful.
Yes. And I mean, I love telling the banks that, to say the person made the only decision they possibly could, understanding the context of their own lives. And the problem is the person's unfreedom. It's the choices the person cannot make. The person does not have a monthly income, a monthly salary in the way we see that. So unless we do not design home loans that require, say, a 9 out of 12 payments in, we will not be able to really give this person a product that will secure the asset. So the bank's idea of people must be educated on understanding the importance of the asset, that's exactly what the person understood. The importance of that family house, the importance of that place where I stay, and willing to take exorbitant interest in terms of securing that.
Wow.
We've actually, can I add on, Nsako?
Yeah, sure.
We were doing quite a similar exercise, but in the insurance space. And what we were finding is that people in sort of these underserved communities were relying on tracking companies to act as their insurance. So they couldn't actually come up with sort of the credit required in order to take out insurance on an asset that they weren't necessarily, it's got a high theft rate or whatever the case is. But they had 2,000 Rand at the time. And that 2,000 Rand, they needed to buy an insurance product because they had now 3 taxis that they needed to insure. But to get insurance, one, is cumbersome and it's a terrible journey. And for them, it just didn't sort of affect any change. But then they started looking at the tracking companies and said, hold on a second, if you put a tracking device into my taxi, you can then just get my taxi back, right? But your 2,000 Rand can only buy you 7 months worth of on-time tracking device. So in month 9, when they came into the tracking office and said, hold on a second, my taxi's been stolen, please can you find it for me? And they say, well, I'm sorry, your sort of policy or your tracking device was switched off 2 months ago because you could only pay so much. It's this terrible consequence of not being able to access product that they really need and want to afford, but in a cash type environment. Very poor communication and turnaround from the organizations that they are helping themselves through to kind of circumvent the loss of their asset. So all of a sudden, you've got all of these different trigger points and no one to actually just help these people survive in an economy that, yes, can run for 7 months of a 12-month cycle. Or can get, it's fascinating. I love it. So very interesting.
Wow.
Thanks, Melanie.
Thank you so much for those. Yeah, thanks so much for the anecdotes, ladies. I'm super, I guess, useful just to understand, I guess, what's happening on the ground and how, organizations are missing it. fundamentally because of the assumptions they often make being so far removed. And yeah, I guess, Robin, the next question was actually going to you because, I imagine as somebody listening on the call, you're probably thinking like, geez, yeah, obviously, like we should be doing these things and it makes so much sense. But, there's always that access problem. How do we actually get close as a corporate to the action? And how do we understand effectively the people who are living in these markets? Robin, could you just give us some practical tips around how that person who's thinking, how do I access these people? How could they do that?
And I'll probably bring Melanie back into it as well here in this question. When it's so interesting because, Nsako, you were saying earlier, how do startups get data? And all they want to do is get their hands on data, and they look at these big corporates saying, oh my gosh, you've got so much data, and please just share some of your data with me. And on the other side, it's a corporate saying, oh my gosh, startups, these people so well. Like, teach us some things, like what value propositions can we win from? And each are sort of serving their own needs and requirements, whilst there's this beautiful human in the middle that's getting pulled around by products that are being posed on them and insights that we're beautifully gathering, but then can often be sort of squished by the big guys. So in accessing data and understanding the humans, there becomes such a need for this collaboration on both parts. But how do we collaborate without being acquired? How do we still live true to our proposition as a startup and knowing our community and caring so much for the community that we are trying to solve for, whilst getting a mutually beneficial relationship between the corporate in itself? So we are going to have to reinvent business models at a corporate level and gain access to data and share data with small businesses so that they can enact change as well. How are we empowering small businesses to grow within South Africa if we constantly hanging on to data that can make a big difference in our country and our continent? So I think here, I think forging relationships, building ecosystems of data exchanges, and yes, we need to be POPIA compliant and we need to be legislatively aware. But how can we forge relationships for the greater good of our people instead of creating this competitive environment where we look to grab the biggest piece of the pie? So I think it's not necessarily just having access to either part. It's how do we play beautifully together to create a difference in using our ecosystems.
Wow, so eloquently put. Yeah, Melanie, go for it.
Yeah, exactly, Robin. As you said, I will come in here because we all need the data. And as I explained earlier, there's a lot of data can be extremely expensive to gather, especially street level data, that absolute human-centric data. And in our view of all of these years, as we cannot see that this problem is going to be really addressed unless we create a data commons on marginalized and unevenly served communities where we can collectively and ethically use the data to find better ways to increase people's sustainable livelihoods and people's quality of life, and where you can track all of the measures. So this whole idea of everybody sitting on their own little piece of data is costing customers, like you said, Robin. The beautiful people are paying the highest price for this in our guessing games of what could be right. But yeah, so a data commons. So if we can maybe get all of our participants to get their minds around that idea, that it's because of our mental models, but I've never seen that people look even at the same research report and interpret it the same way, because it's about the questions you ask the data. And that the data itself is not the competitive advantage. The how we use the data becomes the competitive advantage. And that then creates that case for data commons on marginalized areas.
Wow. Sure. So such powerful insights. I guess really it does come down to how we are able to reframe the engagement model away from this competition and let's buy them and take them out to a more kind of collaborative mindset. going back to, I guess, Pratika's point around the importance of these partnerships to actually unlock and create value for the economy. Pratika, I mean, I think it's so timely in the conversation to, I guess, then bring you back in. You spend so much time evaluating South African businesses for investment in your corporate role, but also in your informal, I guess, angel engagements that you have. How do you actually assess a team's ability to identify and build on their core value proposition? And yeah, I'm curious to understand a little bit more about the importance of validation in your decision-making process.
Thanks, Ntako. And, echoing what my fellow panelists are saying, having that design thinking, human-centered approach is absolutely critical. Product and market validation is the key to any successful business, but it's important that it's an ongoing process and not a once-off, developing a product at the start and not revisiting or validating again. There's three particular things that I look for when assessing a team's ability to build out their core value proposition. The one is, have they run proof of concepts, pilots, and more importantly, what have they learned from those pilots that they've run, the insights that they've gained, and how has that informed their product development? And that leads me to my second point that I look at. How has their product been developed? Was it a phased approach? Did they do the wireframing, prototyping, MVP evolution, and important aspects learned and informing each stage? I like to see that. And then thirdly, typically if they are post-revenue or they have some customers, do they have a customer base that are recurring or repeat? And is their customer base growing? And it's not always easy to assess when companies are early stage, but sometimes you do get indicators of, and we're not talking a massive customer base, but at least there's signs of some level of benefit to that customer base and stickiness to the product. But I also want to mention that it's important not to respond to every customer need and requirement. I think you need to remember what is the vision of your business and why are you in business and what is your mission, and taking what is the most highest priority needs and wants from your customers and informing your product roadmap from that perspective. Typically with early stage companies, time and cash is extremely scarce, and doing the right validation and building your product in a thoughtful manner will save you both time and money on your software development lifecycle. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you so much for that.
Can I jump in there, Ntako?
Yes, please do.
Pratika, you are speaking my language. I feel like often there's this perception of you get this bright spark idea, it's perfect and polished off the bat. You can go out, do a big build, roll it out, and people will love it. And that's really the case. It's often a process of validation, of making small steps, maybe starting with one idea, but then while you test it in the market and while you bounce your idea and get that feedback from your actual customers and your actual users, you change direction a little bit. You have to be led by what you learn and what you gather and what people actually want and need. And iterating on your idea is not a bad thing. It's actually a really positive approach. And yes, you might be making progress in a slow way, but it's a steady way and it's a promising way. And what I've seen is that normally leads to really impactful and valuable solutions instead of starting with this idea and then taking it back from there. So that validation journey and that iterative process is definitely a good approach.
Thanks so much for that, Monet. And that brings us to the end of the very first segment of our Q&A. We are now going to transition over to the questions that we've received from the audience. And we're going to, I guess, pose them out in the open. And whichever panelist, I guess, resonates with the question the most is then able to sink their teeth into it. So I guess we can just jump right into that. So the first question that we received was that what common challenges do early stage South African startups encounter when articulating their market value proposition, and how can they overcome it? Or them, rather.
I'm happy to take a stab at this one, Sako. From what I've seen, sometimes a challenge or a gap in terms of understanding what their competitors are doing in the space. Sometimes early stage ventures believe they have no competition, which is also rarely the case. So I like to see application of the mind in terms of understanding your competitive landscape and being quite honest about what you're good at, where there are overlaps. Yeah, that's my feedback.
And how can they
just to,
that? Okay, go for it.
Oh, I think just to also add on my side, I think what I've noticed is a lot of early stage startups are not very familiar with a lot of like tools, for example, like no-code tools or to build a minimal viable product before spending a lot of money on actual developing and making the grand scheme, as was mentioned earlier on. So basic things like utilizing WhatsApp APIs, no-code tools that are there, building websites with free to use it technology instead of to test and then validate first. I think is one of the knowledge gaps, because people think that they require a large amount of money to test the customer. Number two, feedback loops. One thing that was big was after having serviced the customer, it's important to listen to them and ask them, how was your experience? What can I improve on? Because it moves to helping you build for the customer. So I think those basic non-economic things are very important, but are highly overlooked, specifically at the beginning stages of a startup.
And Louisa, I'd like to add on that first point of yours about using low-code tools and using simple methods to really validate something before you spend a lot of money. And I'm very much a fan of that experimentation approach where you start off with cheap and really quick experiments or ways of validating, and then as you become more confident in your idea, it makes sense to spend more time and spend more money and use more expensive tools or do a custom or a bespoke build. But at the beginning, you don't want to invest that much. You want to learn quickly with whatever would enable you to gain those learnings. If it's a low-code tool, if it's a spreadsheet, or doing something behind the scenes to make it seem like a product is working perfectly, you got to do what you got to do in order to get that validation and start slow and then move from there.
Fantastic. I loved the engagement and the different perspectives coming to the fore there. So I guess we'll swiftly move along to the next question, because I think you've done it absolute justice between the three of you. So the next question was, what areas do you see having the most potential for Kasi business growth in the upcoming months and years? Who would love to give this one a go? So which are the areas of highest potential? Yeah.
No, I think there's been a big mandate, even being pushed by the government due to the high unemployment rate currently for the youth. I did post a link also on someone asked the question as well. So the government is actively trying to stimulate the e-commerce market or the economy for specifically township, as it's one of the low-hanging fruits that have been underlooked or underserved quite a bit. So e-commerce is quite big. Obviously, that's part and parcel of what we do in terms of the delivery as well. Another thing is
oh, Louise, so it looks like we've lost you. Shame, and you are on such a roll. Anyone else would want to pick up from that point? Oh, okay, there's Loyiso again. Sorry, Melanie, before you go, let's just give Loyiso an opportunity to finish his thought.
No, it's okay. Melanie can go, it's okay.
All right, fantastic, thanks. Thanks, Louisa. That was very insightful.
And Louisa is very much in line with what you were just positioning. Yeah. It's very much in line with what you're saying, the youth unemployment and the amount of attention that it is getting. I mean, there are so many projects out there that is referring to bridging the gap from learning to earning, of how do we make sure that people go through a trajectory of planning that says, okay, you come out of school, you now become eligible for a job, and then how do we get you towards a job? And I think if people can have their minds around the idea of how do we create access for people, not just to job, but to income generating opportunities, because what if in a more informal setting, and given the economic growth rate or the problems related to that, we're not able to create jobs for people. So anybody that is able to create micro income opportunities of where we tap in and we harness the skills and the capabilities of local people to gather local information and to make sure that local infrastructure is reported and local problems are well registered, in exchange for micro income, and then also the solution of those problems, where people, like whether it be Rand Water or whatever, make sure that they start using local people to fix pipes, to fix the leaks, rather than giving a massive organization a tender to go and do that. But again, then we need that local information about what can local people offer and how do we harness their skills in the local environment for their own benefit, but also the benefit of the larger economy. So I think that learning to earning, that is where there's a massive gap there that needs to be resolved. So I'm absolutely on the same page as Louisa.
Wow, fantastic. Sure, I guess let's move on to the next question. I don't think we need to add anything onto that. So the next one was, how has the uptake and availability of smartphones in lower LSMs impacted market research today compared to 10 years ago? And what digital transformations do we foresee in the next few years?
I can speak a little bit about this one. So the uptake of smartphones, we can definitely see the Kazi community becoming more and more digitized. And most of the internet activity in this community happens on mobile phones. And in order to do that, you obviously need a smartphone as opposed to like a basic phone or a feature phone, or sometimes called a small phone. And so smartphones are definitely on the rise. But data in South Africa is extremely expensive. And this is probably one of the biggest counters of the uptake of smartphones. And yes, there are sometimes like free Wi-Fi available, let's say at some taxi ranks, but then there's an aspect of safety. Do you want to take out your phone and make it really visible? It might not be that safe. And fixed lines are just not very widespread in townships at the moment. Yes, there are a drive towards that, but we're not there yet. So data is definitely a massive blocker there. And in terms of user research, because that's where my head goes in terms of like smartphones and just understanding the market better. You know, post-COVID, we've gotten really used to doing user research in a remote way, but I still find it really valuable to do it in person and really have good, honest, open, candid conversations without the digital aspect involved. So in terms of user research, using smartphones, not always a must for me.
Sure.
Perhaps I can follow on with that, because there's some amazing sort of solutions coming through into the market on a data-free platform. So we've seen the Moya app, for example. So the Moya app is a data-free application, and it gives you sort of like signals as to what of those mini apps you can use in a data-free environment. And I think it's amazing because they're really driving interaction of a subset of the market where you can gain data or airtime by like completing surveys and quizzes and those sorts of things. And yes, of course, it's sponsored by many of the corporate environments. But people are trying to use these platforms to circumvent some of the third-party cookies that are going to come to an end in the next year or two. So how do you create ecosystem-enabled platforms that allow people to connect, but in a data-free world? So you would have seen also the release of Moment, which is the multi-choice loyalty rewards platform. They're targeting sort of the 50 million households, even more, that have a multi-choice device, and now getting them to enact and pay through their wallet and their system, getting those transactions across, and then repaying them in loyalty through airtime. So airtime and data is becoming a big loyalty play within our environment, and it's going to be really amazing to see how people use the data that gets used by them having supplied that data, and what the legislations and those sorts of things are going to say about it. So yeah, interesting space to play in.
Sure. What a time to be alive. But obviously, there are always these blockers. And I guess I want to pivot to the next question that speaks to what are some of the blockers that could impact digital transformation in the space. I mean, we've mentioned data as one of them. I think load shedding comes to mind as well, as a factor that undermines this effort. Who would love to expand on those two? Are there other factors, maybe based on research that you've picked up over the years, that are limiting digitization? Go for it.
So from our side, it's really, on the one side, we live in this world with this enormous amounts of data. And then on the other side, everybody, that is not for every level in the economic pyramid. So what we mostly see when things go seriously wrong, it's based on our lack of understanding of the contextual realities of people's everyday lives. We often design for people similar to ourselves, for friends and family and colleagues. And within that frame, people come up with very, very good ideas, but then just miss it because of a misunderstanding of the realities of everyday South Africans and the struggles that they have. So that's also why we started the Center for Democratizing Information. So regardless of the fact that we're a commercial entity, we ended up starting an NPO that says, before we do not share data better, a lot of these things are just going to keep on failing, whether it is formal organizations trying to play in these markets, or whether it is the lack of access for SMMEs to detailed research.
Sure. Thanks so much for that. Wow, this is very insightful. I think we'll then move over to the next one, because I think that was quite satisfactory. How are you able to tell when a company has product market fit? I guess the age-old question that everyone asks themselves. Pratika, this sounds appropriate for you.
I was going to volunteer a response, but it's almost an elusive topic or question. I feel as though as your product evolves, the market's changing, consumer needs change as well. Often companies that I work closely with, you've established product market fit, revenues increasing, and your business needs to pivot, and you need to establish that product market fit again, whether it's changing your pricing or changing your offering slightly. But I don't think that's an end state. It's an evolution and a journey.
Sure. That's really interesting. And I guess an interesting thing that I often see with founders is that, perhaps maybe they might get product market fit with a particular customer segment, and then now they're wanting to start to entertain larger enterprise clients, and finding that the same product doesn't quite solve the same, pain points for a larger client. So I guess to that point around it being an ever-evolving thing, it's, I guess, a quest that you're always going to be on in your startup journey.
Yes, and just to add to that, as you start working with bigger and bigger corporates, you need to also focus on the back end of your business and not just the customer facing in. So whether it's governance, compliance, your financials are in order, regulatory adherence. So it's the full stack of your business.
Sure. So I guess I also want to phrase this a bit differently because it's such a topical discussion point. As a startup, how will you know? What will start to happen in your business when you've got early signals of this product market fit? Pratika, I'm hoping to engage you a bit further.
I'm going to lean on my esteemed colleagues and research experts to, if there's a metric or qualifying criteria to answer that one, because that's a difficult question. I'm going to bow out. Thank you.
It certainly is difficult.
Advocate.
Robin, do you want to go?
No. It's just like, have the conversations, taste it, just get in there, get down and dirty with it, man. Just like understand how people engage with it, and if they like, how they're going to improve it with you. Some of the most valuable insights I've received is when I bring our like segments that have been with us along the journey and said, okay, well, introduce me to a couple of your friends. I want to test it with them or with you. Show me how you would work with it. Show me how you would use it. Don't just rely on data like click-throughs and those sorts of things. It's not really useful if they're not giving you enough feedback to iterate and think about the execution again. And then as those advocates become ambassadors, that you're gaining traction somewhere. So harness that energy and see where it takes you.
Sure. Thanks so much for that, Robin. And I guess some of the stuff. Oh, okay, go for it.
Just to add on to that, like I mentioned earlier on, I think one important metric that we have in the startup world is called the LTV, lifetime value of a customer. So your propensity of maintaining and retaining the same customer for an extended period of time. So that's one thing we really watch, and I do believe it's a tough answer, but I do believe that critically analyzing and focusing on retention and how long a customer stays with you is a sign of getting to product market fit. And it's not an easy thing to get to. It's quite a daunting thing, but focusing on retention metrics, I think that's key to getting there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys. So we've got one more question left, and then we would have reached the end. So the final one was, how does one go about designing for value in a large organization? Who would like to take this one?
If I may, and I think the first thing is to ask something about the organization. Is the organization human-centric? And what we often ask as do we only see the money in the customer's pockets, or do we see the life journey of a human that we're going to add value to? So are people only looking at what can our technology handle, what is fitting with finance in that? And of course, those things are important as well. But in many cases, it depends on the type of organization that you are there and whether they are willing to say that we can redesign some of the things within the organization to add better value to markets that are historically and currently just underserved.
Sure.
Yeah, I agree with that. There's that core goal that you kind of want to reach, and sometimes it's a mix of business goals and customer goals and like these whole bunch of different goals, but there's often a midway that's beneficial, mutually beneficial for all of the different parties. And I think if we go back to the very start of this webinar, we focused on being user-centric and solving needs and really making sure that we know what the pain points of customers or users are, and that we make sure that we solve that. And I feel like designing for value is putting that in the center of everything that you do and making sure that you reach those goals. So how do you design for value in established organizations? I think it's going back to those goals, back to those questions, and seeing how it overlaps and how you can really solve those problems with that in mind. with
Thank
the
you
user,
so much for that.
the customer, the person always at the center of everything.
Awesome, Monet. Thank you so much for that. And I think that's the note on which we'll end the discussion this evening. We've spoken about a lot of things this evening. We've touched on the importance of contextual relevance of our research tools. We've spoken about the importance of designing around the way that people live their lives, as opposed to introducing solutions and hoping people are going to, I guess, change their behavior. We've spoken about the importance of localization, being close to the ground and understanding that not everyone speaks English as a first language. And what does that mean for the way in which we design solutions? I loved some of the points shared, particularly around the importance of collaboration. If we're going to create value in this market, it's not going to be done alone in isolation, but you're going to really have to look around and see what are the strategic partnerships that you can do, that you can make to, add value in that space for yourself, but also for the end customer. And then, of course, the big theme, and I guess the most important word of the day, is human-centered design, and just the real importance of putting humans at the center of whatever we do, and not focusing so much on these flashy custom solutions, but rather starting a little bit smaller than that and spending time with real people, getting insights, building from there. And ultimately, that is how we're going to create solutions that change the lives of people, but also this economy as a whole. So I just want to say thank you so much to you amazing panelists. It's been such a pleasure to engage with you. Thank you so much as well for Delta Innovate for creating such an impactful platform for us to engage on such an important topic as this. And then, of course, most importantly, thank you so much for the audience and everyone who's made it to this point. I really hope that you felt that it was a good use of your time and that you're going to walk away with something insightful and valuable as you go out there and try and change the world and make a difference in these markets. So what we're going to do after this is that we're going to reach out to you in the next day or two with some resources that have been shared this evening. And we're also going to put you in contact with the panelists. We'll share their contact details. And if maybe there's somebody you want to continue the engagement and the conversation with, then you'll have the opportunity to do that. But thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to be your host this evening. And I hope that you have a very safe evening. And thank you so much. Goodbye.